tariffs above 100%. Supply chains fracturing in real time. Headlines screaming about a new Cold War. Every major analyst is telling you the US and China are locked in a permanent decoupling. But most analysts are missing this. The loudest confrontations in history are often the last move before a deal. Professor Jiang Xueqin has spent years building a framework called predictive history. The idea that geopolitical patterns repeat with enough precision that you can actually forecast what comes next. In his most recent lecture, Professor Jiang pointed at this exact moment, April 2026, and said, "Watch for a grand bargain. Not a ceasefire, not a pause, a fundamental restructuring of the US-China relationship." That is a massive claim, so let's break down exactly what he means, why history backs it up, and what it would look like if he's right. Here's the core thesis. Professor Jiang argues that hegemonic powers don't fight to the finish. They negotiate at the edge of the cliff. When two great powers push confrontation to its maximum, tariffs, sanctions, military posturing, the economic pain on both sides becomes politically unbearable. That pain creates the conditions for a deal that neither side could have sold domestically 6 months earlier. According to Professor Jiang's framework, we are in what he calls the maximum pressure phase, the phase that immediately precedes a grand bargain. The noise is deafening right now because the negotiation is almost over. Think about what that means. If he's right, every headline you're reading about escalation is actually a signal of resolution. The louder it gets, the closer the deal is. Here's a direct quote from Professor Jiang's framework. The historical record is unambiguous. Empires do not go to war when they are screaming at each other across a table. They go to war when one side stops showing up. Right now, both sides are still at the table. Both sides are still at the table. That sentence does a lot of work. Let's look at why history agrees with him. First, the Plaza Accord of 1985. The US and Japan spent 3 years in what looked like an irreconcilable trade war. American politicians were literally smashing Japanese electronics on the steps of Congress. The rhetoric was nuclear. The economic friction was real. And then, inside a single weekend at the Plaza Hotel in New York, the 5 largest economies restructured global currency arrangements entirely. Japan agreed to let the yen appreciate massively. The US agreed to pull back on protectionist legislation. Both sides got something. Both sides gave something. The deal happened not despite the confrontation, it happened because of it. The confrontation created the leverage that made the deal possible. Sound familiar? Second, the Nixon-Mao opening of 1972. In the years before that famous handshake, the United States and China were in a state of total ideological war. Proxy conflicts, mutual demonization, zero diplomatic contact. From the outside, it looked completely impossible that these two powers would ever speak as equals. But Professor Jiang's framework shows that both sides had a shared enemy, the Soviet Union, and that shared threat created the conditions for a bargain neither could announce publicly until it was done. Here's the pattern. The grand bargain was negotiated in secret while the public confrontation continued at full volume. When the announcement came, it shocked the world, but insiders on both sides had seen it coming for months. Third, the Entente Cordiale of 1904. Britain and France had been colonial rivals for over 2 centuries. Fashoda, Egypt, West Africa. They had nearly gone to war multiple times in living memory, and then, in a matter of months, they signed one of the most comprehensive diplomatic realignments in European history. Not because they started liking each other, because the rising threat of Germany made the cost of continued rivalry too high. The Entente wasn't friendship. It was a calculated grand bargain. Each side gave up claims the other side wanted. Each side got security the other side could provide. The rivalry didn't disappear, it got managed. Here's the question Professor Jiang is asking right now. What is the 2026 equivalent of the German threat? The shared pressure that forces Washington and Beijing to manage their rivalry instead of escalate it. His answer is the global debt spiral, the fracturing of the dollar system, and the mutual economic destruction that 100% tariffs are already beginning to cause. Both sides need a deal. Neither side can say so publicly yet. So what does Professor Jiang's predictive history framework actually predict? Here are 5 specific falsifiable calls. Prediction 1. By September 2026, back-channel US-China negotiations will become public knowledge, either through a leak or a joint announcement. The talks are already happening. The question is when the mask comes off. Prediction 2. The grand bargain, when it arrives, will involve a US concession on Taiwan's international status in exchange for a Chinese concession on currency and trade imbalances. Neither side will frame it that way publicly, but that's the trade. Prediction 3. At least 2 major US allies, likely in Europe or the Middle East, will quietly signal alignment with China's position on specific trade issues before the end of 2026. This is the coalition fracturing that forces Washington's hand. Prediction 4. The US Federal Reserve and the People's Bank of China will coordinate, formally or informally, on a currency stabilization mechanism before the end of Q3 2026. Watch the currency markets, not the tariff headlines. Prediction 5. If no grand bargain emerges by December 2026, Professor Jiang's framework predicts a sharp pivot. One or both sides will engineer a controlled crisis to create the political cover for a deal, a fake escalation that produces a real resolution. 5 predictions, all falsifiable, all time-bound. Write them down and check back at the end of the year. Here's the synthesis. Professor Jiang Xueqin's predictive history framework is not saying the US and China are about to become friends. They are not. It's saying something more precise and more uncomfortable. It's saying that great powers at the edge of the cliff consistently choose managed rivalry over mutual destruction, and they always do it through a grand bargain that the public never sees coming. The pattern from 1904, 1972, and 1985 is identical. Maximum pressure, shared threat, back-channel deal, public shock. Then a new equilibrium that everyone immediately claims was inevitable. We are in the maximum pressure phase right now. The tariffs, the rhetoric, the military posturing. This is the final act of negotiation, not the opening act of war. That's what the historical record says. That's what Professor Jiang is betting on. The real question, and I want you to argue this in the comments, is this. Does the grand bargain theory assume too much rationality from both sides? Or is rational self-interest exactly what makes empires predictable? Drop your answer below. And if you want to follow these predictions as they play out in real time, subscribe to Predictive Echoes. We track the patterns every week so you don't have to.